When Leo aged out of the system at 18, he had little more than a thin file of paperwork and a strange inheritance, an abandoned military radio station in the middle of nowhere. What he found there wasn't just old equipment or a place to hide from the world. It was a secret that would redefine his entire life, forcing him to choose between a comfortable lie and a difficult truth. If you've ever felt lost or had to start over from nothing, this story is for you. Hit that subscribe button and let's get into it, because sometimes the most broken places are the only ones where we can finally become whole. The air in Ms. Albright's office always smelled the same: stale coffee, cheap lavender air freshener, and the faint, papery scent of hopelessness. It was the smell of the system. For the last 6 years, it had been the background scent of my life. But today was different. Today was my 18th birthday. Today, I was free. Or, as the state of California officially termed it, I was emancipated. It sounded grand, like a country winning its independence. It felt more like being pushed out of a moving car. Ms. Albright, a woman whose exhaustion was etched so deep into her face it looked like a part of her bone structure, slid a manila folder across the desk. My name was typed on the tab: Leo Vance. Inside was my life, condensed into a dozen stapled forms: birth certificate, social security card, a record of my placements, foster home, group home, another group home, a history of temporary addresses. "This is it, Leo," she said, her voice flat. She'd said these words to dozens of kids before me. "You're an adult now." She pushed another, smaller envelope toward me. "This is your final transitional stipend, $400. I recommend you find a room to rent by the end of the week. It won't last long." I nodded, my throat too tight to speak. $400 a week. After that, a sheer cliff. I looked at the money, then at the folder. My entire existence, valued at $400 and a stack of paper. There was a knot of something cold and heavy in my stomach. It wasn't just fear. It was a profound sense of nothingness. I had no family to call, no friends on the outside. The connections I'd made in the system were designed to be temporary, like stitches meant to dissolve. Now, the stitches were gone, and I wasn't sure the wound had healed. I was just done. A completed file, a closed case. "There's one more thing," Ms. Albright said, pulling a large, stiff document envelope from her drawer. It was old, the color of weak tea, and sealed with a brittle strip of yellowed tape. My name was written on the front in an elegant, spidery cursive I'd never seen before. "This came to the office about a month ago, from a law firm. It was to be given to you on your 18th birthday, no sooner." I stared at it. It felt alien on her government-issue metal desk. It was personal. Nothing in my life had been personal for a very long time. "Who's it from?" I asked, my voice raspy. "Your maternal grandfather, it seems, a Mr. Arthur Vance." The name hit me like a physical blow. Arthur Vance. My mother, before she died, had spoken of him in hushed, fragmented sentences. He was a ghost, a myth in our tiny, broken family. A brilliant man, a military man, who had vanished from her life when she was just a teenager. She never knew why. She died thinking he had abandoned her. I'd grown up believing it too. Another man who had simply walked away. The anger I felt was old and familiar, a dull stone I had carried for as long as I could remember. "I don't want it," I said, pushing it back toward her. "He left. He left her. He left us. Whatever that is, I don't want it." Ms. Albright looked at me, and for the first time, the professional mask cracked. A flicker of something soft, something like pity, crossed her eyes. "Leo, you have $400 and no address. You have to at least see what it is." She nudged it back. Her finger rested on the envelope for a second longer than necessary. "Pride is a luxury. Right now, you can't afford it." She was right. The cold logic of the system was the one thing I understood. Survival was about swallowing your pride, your anger, your grief, until you could afford to feel them later. I picked up the envelope. It was heavy. I could feel the stiff edges of documents inside, and something small and hard that shifted when I moved it. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. The tape crumbled into dust. Inside there was a sheaf of legal papers, a single tarnished brass key, and a smaller, sealed letter. I pulled out the top document. It was a grant deed. My eyes scanned the legalese, the dense blocks of text, until they landed on a description of the property. A 5-acre parcel of unincorporated land in Inyo County, California. And then a line that made no sense. "Including all structures and improvements thereon, specifically the decommissioned United States Air Force Radio Relay Station K7. I read it again and again. A radio station. An abandoned military radio station. A wave of dizziness washed over me. This had to be a joke, a cruel, elaborate prank played by a dead man. I looked at Ms. Albright, my face a mask of confusion. "What is this?" She peered at the document, her brow furrowed. "It looks like a deed of ownership. It appears your grandfather left you property." She then pointed to another document. It was a statement from a small law office I'd never heard of. It detailed how the property taxes had been paid in advance, up to the current year, from a trust. The trust was now depleted. The final line stated that a one-time filing fee of $400 was required to formally transfer the title and assume ownership. $400. The exact amount of my stipend. It wasn't a gift. It was a transaction. My freedom from the state, purchased with the key to a cage of a different kind. I put the deed down and picked up the small, sealed letter. My grandfather's name was on the back. Arthur Vance. With a deep breath, I opened it. The letter inside was short, written on the same heavy, cream-colored paper. "Leo," it began, and the sight of my name in that same elegant script sent a shiver down my spine. "If you are reading this, then I am long gone, and you are a man. I know you have questions. I know you are probably angry. I don't blame you. I cannot explain everything in this short note, but the answers are there. They are at K7. The key will open the main door. What you find there is yours. It is a lonely place, but it is a safe one. You can sell it, or you can make it your own. The choice is yours, and yours alone. I hope you will find it in your heart to forgive an old man's difficult choices. Be safe. Your grandfather, Arthur." I folded the letter, my knuckles white. A safe place. The words echoed in the sterile silence of the office. I hadn't known a safe place since my mother was alive. The group homes were about control, not safety. The foster homes were about pretending, not safety. Safety was a foreign country, and now a ghost was offering me a ticket, a key to a ruin in the middle of the desert. I looked at the brass key, dull and heavy in my palm. It was a solid object, a real thing in a world of paperwork and promises that evaporated. I looked at Ms. Albright. Her expression was unreadable. She didn't know what to advise. This was off script. The system had no protocol for inheriting an abandoned military base. "What are you going to do?" she asked softly. I looked down at the documents, the key, the letter. My choices were stark. A rented room in a city that didn't want me, a slow slide into the homelessness I saw on the streets every day. Or this wild, insane, impossible thing. A concrete box in the desert. A legacy from a man I despised but was, suddenly, desperately curious about. It wasn't really a choice at all. It was the only thread I had. "I'm going to Inyo County," I said, the words feeling strange and momentous in my mouth. "I'm going to see my property." For the first time in a very long time, I had a destination. I didn't know if I was walking toward a home or a grave, but for the first time, I was the one choosing the direction. I was walking toward an answer. The bus ride was a slow, grinding transition from one world to another. I sat with my face pressed against the cool glass, watching Los Angeles disassemble itself behind me. The concrete towers and sprawling freeways gave way to endless suburbs, then to strip malls, and finally to the parched, open land of the high desert. Each mile put more distance between me and the life I had known. A life of confinement, defined by bells and curfews and the watchful eyes of staff. The air in the bus was thick with the smell of disinfectant and the quiet desperation of people in transit. I clutched my backpack, which held everything I owned, a few changes of clothes, the manila folder from Ms. Albright, and the heavy envelope from my grandfather. The key was in my pocket, a constant, weighty reminder of the absurdity of my journey. I had paid the $400 at a county clerk's office downtown, a bureaucratic ritual that felt both monumental and meaningless. A tired woman stamped my papers with a heavy thud, took my entire net worth, and handed me a receipt. Just like that, I was a landowner. I owned 5 acres of dirt and rust I had never seen, thanks to a man I had never met. The thought was so bizarre, it bordered on hysterical. As the bus climbed higher into the Mojave, the landscape grew more severe, more alien. The earth was a palette of brown and beige, dotted with skeletal Joshua trees, reaching for a sky so vast and empty it hurt to look at. This was the lonely place my grandfather had written about. He wasn't wrong. I felt a knot of anxiety tighten in my chest. What was I doing? I was a city kid, raised in a concrete ecosystem. I didn't know anything about the desert, about solitude, about living off the grid. I knew how to navigate bus schedules and avoid fights in the rec room. I didn't know how to fix a generator or purify water. The bus wheezed to a stop in a town called Lone Pine. It wasn't so much a town as a single main street, dwarfed by the jagged, snow-capped peaks of the Sierra Nevada to the west. The air that hit me when the doors opened was thin and sharp, smelling of dust and pine. It was clean in a way that felt abrasive to my city-accustomed lungs. My final destination was still another 20 miles out, in a part of the valley the bus didn't service. I found a payphone outside the general store and called the only taxi number listed. A gruff voice answered. "Where are you headed?" the voice crackled. "A place called K7, I said. An old Air Force station off the 395. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "The old listening post? Haven't had a call to go out there in 20 years. You sure, kid?" "I'm sure," I said, trying to sound more confident than I felt. "All right, be $50. I'll be there in 10. The taxi was a battered Ford Crown Victoria that looked like it had personally survived the Cold War. The driver was a man named Sal, with a leathery face and eyes that had seen too much sun. He didn't talk much, which was a relief. He just drove, his hands steady on the wheel. We turned off the main highway onto a cracked asphalt road that wound its way deeper into the valley. The mountains receded, replaced by low, rolling hills and endless scrubland. There was nothing out here. No houses, no power lines, no signs of life. Just the road, the sky, and the hum of the engine. "What's a kid like you doing out at the old post?" Sal finally asked, his curiosity getting the better of him. "I inherited it," I said simply. He glanced at me in the rear-view mirror, his expression a mixture of surprise and pity. "Inherited it? Huh. Old man Vance's place. Figured the government would have bulldozed it by now, or the coyotes would have claimed it." "You knew him? Arthur Vance?" I asked, leaning forward. "Didn't know him, not really. Saw him around. Kept to himself. Came into town for supplies once a month, loaded up his truck, and went back to his hill. Folks said he was some kind of spook. Said he was hiding from something. This was years ago. Then he just stopped coming. People figured he'd died out there." Sal shrugged. "Guess he did. Hiding from something." The words echoed my grandfather's letter. A safe place. The taxi slowed and turned onto an even more decrepit road, little more than a dirt track. A faded sign, riddled with bullet holes, read, "U.S. government property, no trespassing." The car rattled and groaned as we climbed a low hill. And then I saw it. At the crest of the hill, silhouetted against the pale afternoon sky, was a single, massive radio tower, a skeleton of rusted red steel. Below it sat a low, windowless concrete building, half swallowed by weeds and shifting earth. It didn't look like a building. It looked like a tomb. Sal pulled up to a chain-link fence topped with barbed wire. A heavy gate, secured by a thick, rusted chain and a padlock, blocked the entrance. "This is as far as I go," he said, putting the car in park. I got out, my legs unsteady. The silence was absolute. There was no traffic, no sirens, no people. Just the whisper of the wind moving through the dry grass. It was the quietest place I had ever been. It felt like the end of the world. I paid Sal the $50, my hand shaking slightly. He looked at me, then at the desolate station, then back at me. "You got a way to call for a ride back?" he asked, a genuine note of concern in his voice. "I'll be okay," I said, though I wasn't sure I believed it. He hesitated, then handed me a worn business card. "You get in a jam, you call me, day or night. There's no cell service out here, but if you can get to a landline, if there even is one in that bunker, you call." I took the card. "Thanks." He nodded, put the car in reverse, and drove away, leaving me alone in a cloud of dust. I stood there for a long time, just looking. The fence was sagging in places, the barbed wire curled and broken. The gate looked like it hadn't been opened in decades. This was it. K7, my inheritance. A 5-acre cage of rust and concrete. I walked to the gate, the heavy brass key in my hand. The padlock was enormous, an old military-grade block of steel. To my surprise, the key slid in perfectly. With a groan of protest from metal that hadn't moved in a generation, the lock clicked open. The sound was unnervingly loud in the profound silence. I unwound the chain, its heavy links cold and gritty in my hands, and pulled the gate open. It screeched, a long, mournful sound that echoed across the empty landscape. I stepped through. I was no longer a trespasser. I was home. The thought was so bleak, it was almost funny. The path from the gate to the building was choked with weeds and cracked pavement. Nature was methodically reclaiming its territory, pulling the works of man back into the earth. The building itself was a brutalist block of poured concrete, stained dark by years of weather. There were no windows, only a single, heavy steel door painted a faded olive drab. A large, stenciled K7 was barely visible beneath layers of grime and peeling paint. It looked impenetrable, hostile. For a moment, I was certain the key in my pocket was for the gate only, that the building itself would remain sealed, a final, cynical joke from my grandfather. But there was a lock on the door, smaller than the one on the gate, but just as solid-looking. I took a breath and slid the brass key into the keyhole. It fit. I turned it. There was a series of deep mechanical clicks from within the door, like the tumblers of a bank vault falling into place. I pulled on the heavy steel handle. At first, it didn't budge. I put my shoulder into it, grunting with the effort, and with a deep, grinding shriek of rusted hinges, the door scraped open a few inches. A wave of air washed over me from the dark interior. It was an ancient, hermetic smell, cold, musty, and charged with the electric ghost of ozone from machinery long dead. It was the smell of a place that had been holding its breath for 20 years. I pushed the door open wider, enough to slip through, and stepped inside. The door swung shut behind me with a deafening clang and a final decisive click, plunging me into absolute darkness. My heart hammered against my ribs. The blackness was total, a physical pressure against my eyes. I fumbled in my backpack for the small flashlight Ms. Albright had insisted I take. My fingers found the switch, and a thin, weak beam of light cut through the gloom. I was in a small entryway. Straight ahead was another steel door. To my right, a bank of light switches. I flicked one. Nothing. I tried another. Nothing. Of course. The power had been cut decades ago. The silence in here was different from the silence outside. It was a dead, muffled quiet, the kind that absorbs sound. I pushed open the inner door and stepped into the main part of the station. The flashlight beam danced across the space, revealing a large, cavernous room. It was filled with hulking metal consoles, racks of electronic equipment, and chairs bolted to the floor. Everything was draped in yellowed canvas sheets, making the machines look like a sleeping army of shrouded figures. Dust motes, thick as insects, swarmed in the beam of my light. It was a time capsule, a forgotten nerve center from a forgotten war. I walked slowly through the main operations room, my footsteps echoing unnervingly. The air was frigid, colder than it had been outside. I ran my hand along one of the consoles, my fingers coming away black with grime. I could see the outlines of massive reel-to-reel tape machines, oscilloscopes, and banks of switches and dials whose functions I couldn't begin to guess. This was my grandfather's world. This is where he had spent his last years, hiding, listening. But for what? I moved past the operations room, following a narrow corridor. The flashlight beam revealed several small rooms branching off. One was a workshop, filled with tools hanging neatly on a pegboard, everything coated in a uniform layer of dust. Another was a small lavatory, the toilet bowl stained brown. At the end of the hall, I found what I was looking for. A small room that was clearly the living quarters. There was a simple metal frame cot with a thin, rolled-up mattress, a small desk and a chair, a hot plate and an empty kettle. And on the floor, tucked next to the desk, was a standard-issue military footlocker, painted the same olive drab as the front door. It was locked with a simple combination lock. My heart quickened. This was it. The answers are there. I knelt beside the footlocker, shining my light on the lock. It was a 3-digit combination, 1,000 possibilities. I tried my birthday. Nothing. I tried my mother's birthday. Nothing. I sat back on my heels, frustrated. What numbers would an old, secretive military man use? I thought about the stenciled name on the door. K7. Maybe it wasn't a letter and a number. Maybe it was part of a code. The letter K is the 11th letter of the alphabet. I tried 117. Nothing. I tried the reverse, 711. The lock clicked open. A jolt of adrenaline shot through me. I lifted the heavy lid. I had expected to find money or maybe a weapon, something practical for survival. But the footlocker was filled almost to the brim with paper. On top was a stack of thick, sealed envelopes, each one numbered in that same elegant handwriting. Number 1, number 2, number 3, and so on, up to 10. Beneath the letters was a small, portable reel-to-reel tape recorder and a neat stack of labeled tape boxes. A cold dread, mixed with an intense, burning curiosity, washed over me. This was a story, laid out in careful, deliberate chapters. His story. My story. I picked up the first envelope. It felt heavy, important. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely break the seal. Inside was a letter, many pages long. I sat down on the cold, concrete floor, aimed the wavering beam of my flashlight at the first page, and began to read. "My dearest Leo," the letter began. The words swam before my eyes. It was one thing to see my name on a formal note. It was another to see it in a salutation that spoke of affection. "If you are reading this, it means that I have failed in my most fervent hope, which was to one day deliver this to you in person, to look you in the eye and ask for your forgiveness. I am writing this in the year 2002. You are just a small boy. Your mother, my beautiful, brave daughter, sends me photographs. I have a picture of you on my desk. You have her eyes. I am so sorry, Leo. I need you to know that. Every choice I have made, every action that has led you to this cold, empty place, was born from a desire to protect you and your mother. It was a flawed, desperate kind of protection, and I know it felt from your side like nothing but abandonment. For that, I am eternally sorry." I had to stop reading. A sob, thick and ragged, tore its way out of my chest. I lowered the pages and cried. I cried for the boy in the photograph I never knew existed. I cried for my mother, who had died believing her father didn't love her. I cried for myself, for the years of anger I had nurtured against this man, this ghost, who was now speaking to me from the grave with a voice full of love and regret. The tears felt hot on my cold skin. The flashlight trembled, casting dancing shadows on the concrete walls, making the silent, shrouded machines in the other room look like mourners at a funeral. After a few minutes, the wave of grief subsided, leaving behind a hollow ache. I wiped my eyes on my sleeve, picked up the letter again, and forced myself to continue reading. I was not just a radio operator in the Air Force, Leo. My specialty was signals intelligence, a listener. During the final years of the Cold War, I was stationed at a remote listening post in Turkey, monitoring Soviet communications. It was sensitive, classified work. But we weren't just listening to the Soviets. We were listening to everyone, including our own allies. One night, I intercepted a series of communications that should not have existed. It was a back-channel conversation between a high-ranking officer in our own command and a contact in a supposedly friendly nation. They were arranging the sale of classified targeting data. Treason. For money. My breath caught in my throat. This was not what I expected. This was the stuff of spy movies, not family history. I did what I was trained to do. I recorded the transmission and reported it up my chain of command. I expected an investigation, a quiet arrest. Instead, I was met with silence. Then, a week later, I was informed that I was being transferred, reassigned to a desk job in North Dakota. My security clearance was downgraded. I was being buried. The officer I had reported was powerful, protected. He knew I had the recording. He couldn't get to me while I was in the service, not directly, but he made it clear through intermediaries that my life and the lives of my family would be in danger if I ever spoke of what I had heard. Your mother was a teenager then. You weren't even born. He knew I had a daughter. He made sure I knew that he knew. When I was honorably discharged a few years later, the threats became more direct. Cars would follow me. My mail was opened. I knew I couldn't go home. I couldn't bring that danger to my daughter's doorstep. So I made the hardest choice of my life. I vanished. I used my old contacts and my knowledge of the system to create a new identity and disappear. I had to let your mother believe I had abandoned her. It was a terrible, cruel thing to do, but I believed it was the only way to keep the target off her back. If they thought I had no one, they would have no leverage. I broke her heart to save her life. I used the last of my savings to buy this place, K7. It was being decommissioned. I bought it through a shell corporation. It was the perfect hiding spot. A concrete box in the middle of nowhere, with its own power and a radio tower that could reach the world if it needed to. I brought the original tape with me, the evidence. I've spent the last 20 years here, waiting for the powerful men who buried my report to retire or die, waiting for a time when it would be safe to come forward. I grew old in this bunker, Leo. I watched the world change through static on a shortwave radio. And I watched you grow up in photographs. It has been a long, lonely penance. This station is my legacy. It is my fortress and my prison. Now, it is yours. There are other letters, other tapes. They will explain more. But I needed you to have this one first. I needed you to know that you were never, ever abandoned. You were protected in the only way I knew how. I love you, son, more than you could ever know. Arthur. I let the last page fall into my lap. The thin beam of my flashlight was growing weaker, the batteries starting to die. The room was getting colder. But the chill I felt had nothing to do with the temperature. The entire foundation of my life, the simple, bitter story I had told myself about who I was, the grandson of a man who ran away, had just been obliterated. My anger, the fuel that had kept me going for so long, had been a mistake. It was grief, mislabeled. He hadn't left us. He had exiled himself for us. The knowledge was a staggering weight. It was too much to process. I sat there in the fading light, in the profound silence of my grandfather's tomb, and felt the first true, terrifying glimmer of what he had left me. It wasn't a piece of land. It wasn't a pile of junk. It was a story, and I was now at the center of it. The flashlight flickered and died, plunging me back into that suffocating, absolute darkness. I didn't move. I sat on the cold floor, the papers a faint, ghostly square in my lap, and let the reality of my situation wash over me. I was 18 years old, alone in a concrete bunker in the middle of the Mojave Desert. My only connection to the outside world, a business card from a taxi driver named Sal, was useless without a phone. My only food was a half-eaten bag of chips in my backpack. My only companion was the ghost of a grandfather I'd just met, a man who had reshaped my entire understanding of my own past in the space of 10 handwritten pages. The grief I'd felt earlier returned, but it was different now. It was sharper, more complex. I grieved for the man who had spent 20 years in this concrete box, watching his daughter and grandson grow up in faded photographs. I grieved for the relationship we could have had, and I was angry. A new kind of anger, not at him, but at the faceless, powerful men who had forced his hand, who had stolen my grandfather from me. A deep, primal fear began to creep in, cold and sharp. The silence was no longer peaceful. It was predatory. Every creak of the old building, every whisper of wind finding its way through some unseen crack, sounded like a threat. My grandfather had said this place was safe, but it didn't feel safe. It felt like a trap. The temptation to just leave was immense. I could wait until morning, walk the 20 miles back to Lone Pine, and never look back. I could try to sell this place. Some developer might want the land. I could take the money, whatever it was, and disappear. Find a normal life. An apartment, a job. Forget about secret tapes and Cold War conspiracies. It was the sensible thing to do. It was the sane thing to do. But the weight of the letters in my lap held me in place. "The choice is yours," he had written. Was it? Could I really walk away now, knowing what I knew? To abandon this place would be to abandon him all over again. It would be confirming that his sacrifice, his long, lonely penance, was for nothing. Have you ever had a moment like that? A moment where the story you told yourself about your past, about your family, about who you are, was completely turned upside down. It's a feeling that shatters you, but it also clears the ground for something new to be built. If you're getting something from this story, if it's resonating with that part of you that's had to rebuild your own understanding of the world, I hope you'll join our community here. Let me know in the comments what the word home means to you. For me, in that moment, it was a question I couldn't even begin to answer. I spent the night on the thin mattress of the cot, fully clothed, my backpack as a pillow. Sleep was impossible. The cold was a physical presence, seeping into my bones. My own breath plumed in the darkness. I listened to the sounds of the station, trying to decipher its language. The groan of metal contracting in the cold, the skittering of some small creature in the walls. Each sound amplified by the darkness and my own fear. Sometime before dawn, I finally drifted into a shallow, restless sleep, and dreamed of a man with my mother's eyes, sitting in a chair, listening to static from a speaker, waiting. I woke to a faint gray light filtering in from somewhere. I sat up, stiff and cold, and saw that a thin line of daylight was visible under the heavy steel door. Morning. I had survived the night. The first order of business was a rational assessment of my resources. It was a short list. No power, no water, no heat, minimal food, a collection of cryptic letters. It was not a promising start. I remembered my grandfather's letter. There are other letters, other tapes. They will explain more. I went back to the footlocker and took out the second envelope. I didn't open it right away. Instead, I decided to do a more thorough search of the station in the daylight. Armed with a heavy wrench from the workshop, just in case, I pushed open the main door and stepped out into the blinding desert morning. The world looked different. The sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The sun was still low, casting long shadows from the rusted tower and the surrounding hills. The air was crisp and clean. The desolation that had seemed so threatening last night now looked peaceful, stark, but beautiful. I walked the perimeter of the building. It was solid, built to withstand a blast. No weak points, no other entrances. My grandfather had chosen his fortress well. I went back inside, the daylight from the propped-open door illuminating the main room. The shrouded machines looked less like monsters now, more like relics. I started looking for what a man living here alone for 20 years would need. There had to be a power source, a water source, supplies. I found the generator first. It was in a small, soundproofed room off the main corridor, a massive diesel engine that looked like it could power a small town. The fuel tank was empty, the battery long dead. So much for that. Next, I looked for water. I found the pipes in the small lavatory and traced them back. They led not to the outside, but down into the concrete floor. A well? A cistern? I found a large metal plate in the floor of the workshop, bolted down. It took all my strength, using the wrench as a lever, but I managed to get the bolts loose. I lifted the plate. Below was a ladder leading down into darkness. It led to a massive, concrete-lined cistern, half full of stagnant, murky water. It was water, but it wasn't drinkable. Not yet. I was starting to feel a familiar despair creeping back in. This was hopeless. The place was a ruin. It would take a fortune and skills I didn't have to make it livable. I sat down at the dusty desk in the living quarters, the unopened second letter in my hands. Maybe I should just read them all, find out the whole story, and then leave. I tore open the envelope. This letter was different. It wasn't a narrative. It was a set of instructions. Leo, it began, if your situation is what I imagine it to be, you are cold, hungry, and wondering what you've gotten yourself into. Do not despair. I prepared for your arrival. I could not leave you a fortune. Money attracts the wrong kind of attention. But I left you what you need to start. In the main operations room, stand facing the primary transmitter bank, the largest rack of equipment against the west wall. From the left, count 5 floor panels. The 5th panel is not like the others. You will find what you need to make your choice. My heart started to pound again. A scavenger hunt. I grabbed my flashlight. I'd found a box of fresh batteries in the workshop and went into the ops room. I found the transmitter bank he described. The floor was made of raised metal panels, allowing access to the wiring underneath. I counted 5 panels from the left. I knelt down. This panel looked identical to the others. I tried to lift it. It was screwed down. But as I ran my fingers along the edge, I felt a small, almost invisible indentation. I pressed it. With a soft click, a tiny, recessed handle popped out. I pulled on it. The panel lifted easily on a hidden hinge. I shone my light into the space below. My jaw dropped. It was a hidden compartment, a clean, dry space carved out of the subfloor. And it was full. There were several large, sealed crates of military MREs, meals ready to eat. There was a case of water purification tablets. There were tools, a first aid kit, and a hand-crank radio. And in the center of it all was a heavy steel ammunition box. It wasn't locked. I lifted the lid. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, were stacks of cash. $100 bills, bundled in neat, tight bricks. I didn't count it all, but I could tell it was a lot. Tens of thousands of dollars, maybe more. Tucked on top of the money was another, smaller note. I picked it up. Leo, it said, This is your seed money. It is enough to get the generator running, to buy a truck, to make this place a home. Or it is enough for you to take, walk away, and start a new life somewhere else. I will not blame you if you choose the latter. This is a hard place, and the past has long shadows. The choice is truly yours. Live free, Arthur. I sat there on the floor, staring at the money, the food, and the letter. This was the real test. The first letter had given me a new past. This one was offering me a future. 2 futures, to be exact. One was easy. Take the money and run. Disappear, just like he did, but into a life of comfort, not exile. No one would ever know. The other future was hard. It was dirt and rust and back-breaking work. It was staying here, in this lonely place, and trying to build something on the foundation of his sacrifice. It was choosing to take on the weight of his story. I thought about the system, the group homes, the feeling of being temporary, disposable. I thought about the $400 and the cliff I was supposed to fall off of. And I looked at the money in the box. It wasn't just money. It was a chance, a real chance, given to me by a man who had given up everything. And in that moment, I knew what I had to do. I wasn't going to run. I was going to stay. I was going to fight. I closed the lid on the ammo box, but I didn't take it. I left it in its hiding place. I would use it, but I would use it for his purpose. I was going to bring K7 back to life. The decision to stay was one thing. The reality of it was another. The next few weeks were the hardest of my life. My first priority was getting a vehicle. I took a few $100s from the cash, walked the long road back to the highway, and hitched a ride into Lone Pine. The feeling of having that much cash in my pocket was terrifying. I felt like everyone could see it, like I had "thief" written on my forehead. In town, I found a used car lot and bought the least conspicuous vehicle I could find, an old, beat-up Ford Ranger pickup truck for $2,000 cash. It was ugly, but the engine sounded solid. The man selling it gave me a suspicious look, but money is money. Driving back to the station in my own truck, I felt a surge of independence I'd never known. I wasn't a ward of the state anymore. I wasn't a transient. I had a truck. I had a home. A broken, freezing home, but it was mine. Next came the generator. I spent days in the generator room with the old military technical manuals I'd found in the workshop. They were dense and complicated, but I was a patient reader. I learned about diesel engines, about batteries, about inverters. I made a list and drove the Ranger back to town, to the auto parts and hardware stores. I bought new batteries, filters, oil, and several large cans of diesel fuel. The clerk at the hardware store, an old man named George, with flour-dusted overalls, looked at my list. "Big project you got there," he said, not unkindly. "Fixing up the old Vance place?" News traveled fast in a small town. "Trying to," I said. He nodded, a thoughtful look on his face. "Your granddad was a good customer, quiet man, always paid in cash. He knew his engines. If you get stuck, you come ask me." It was the first real offer of help I'd had, and it meant more than he could know. The day I finally tried to start the generator was nerve-wracking. I had cleaned the lines, changed the fluids, and hooked up the new batteries. I took a deep breath and hit the ignition switch. The engine turned over once, twice, with a horrible groaning sound. Then it sputtered. And then, with a deafening roar that shook the entire building. It caught. It bellowed black smoke for a minute, then settled into a steady, powerful rhythm. I ran back into the main corridor and flipped a light switch. The fluorescent lights flickered, hummed, and then flooded the station with a sterile white light. It was glorious. I walked through the rooms, turning on every light. The shrouded machines were revealed in stark detail. The dust seemed thicker under the harsh light, but it was no longer a tomb. It was a machine, waking from a long sleep. With power came the next challenge: water. The well pump was electric. Now that I had power, I could get it running. I filled the cistern with fresh water hauled from town in large barrels, and I used the purification tablets and a new filter system I'd bought to clean the water that was already there. The first time I turned on the tap in the small lavatory and got a stream of clean, running water, I almost wept. Power, water, heat. The small electric heaters I bought made the living quarters bearable. I started sleeping through the night. Slowly, painfully, the bunker was becoming less of a survival challenge and more of a home. I cleaned. I spent days just sweeping, scrubbing, and airing the place out. I took down the yellowed canvas sheets from the equipment, revealing the pristine consoles beneath. The station had been left in a state of perfect preservation, as if my grandfather had just walked out for a moment and never returned. During this time, I made regular trips into town for supplies. I became a familiar face at the diner, at the hardware store. People were wary at first, another outsider in their midst. But they saw the dirt under my nails, the grease on my jeans. They saw the old Ford Ranger loaded with lumber or plumbing supplies. I wasn't a tourist. I was working. The nods I got from locals became friendlier. The waitress at the diner, a woman named Maria, started calling me Hun and made sure my coffee cup was never empty. These small moments of connection were like anchors, mooring me to this new life. I was becoming a part of the landscape. One day, a letter arrived in the P.O. box I'd rented in town. It was a crisp, professional envelope from a firm called Pioneer Valley Development Group. The logo was a stylized mountain peak. I opened it. It was a formal offer to purchase my property, 5 acres of land, for the sum of $50,000. As part of our ongoing efforts to revitalize the region, the letter read, $50,000. A few months ago, that would have seemed like all the money in the world. I could take that, plus the cash in the ammo box, and be set for life. The easy way out. But I knew better now. I looked at the name. Pioneer Valley Development Group. It sounded so wholesome. I folded the letter and put it in my pocket. My grandfather had warned me. Money attracts the wrong kind of attention. This wasn't about revitalization. This was about what was buried here. The offer wasn't an opportunity, it was a threat. That night, back at the station, the hum of the generator a comforting presence, I knew it was time. I had a home. I had a foothold. Now I needed to understand the rest of the story. I went to the footlocker and took out the last of the numbered envelopes and the box of reel-to-reel tapes. I sat at the main console in the operations room, the place my grandfather must have sat for thousands of lonely hours. I threaded the first tape, labeled Origin, onto the machine. I had cleaned and tested it, and it spun to life with a soft whir. I opened the final letter. Leo, it said, if you have made it this far, if you have chosen to stay, then you are ready for the truth. Not just my truth, but the truth this station was built to protect. The man I reported, General Marcus Thorne, was more than just a traitor. He was building a private intelligence network, selling state secrets to the highest bidder, corporations, foreign governments, anyone. He was one of the first to realize that in the coming century, information would be more valuable than armies. When I disappeared, he couldn't be sure I hadn't made copies of the tape. He couldn't risk coming after me directly, so he waited. He retired from the Air Force with full honors and moved into the private sector. He founded a company, a very successful, very powerful company. I paused, a cold feeling spreading through my chest. I looked at the letter I'd received that day. Pioneer Valley Development Group. I continued reading. He knew where I was. He had the resources to find me. But he left me alone, a king in my concrete castle, because as long as I was here, he knew where the evidence was. He was containing the threat. But he's an old man now, even older than me, if he's still alive. His organization, however, will live on. They will want to sanitize the record. They will want to erase any loose ends. They will want this land. They will want to dig up this bunker and ensure that the tape I have is the only one, and that it is destroyed. They will not come with guns, Leo. They will come with lawyers and contracts. They will offer you money. They will try to bury you in paperwork, just as they buried me. My blood ran cold. The letter wasn't a prophecy. It was a field report. It was happening, right now. The tapes are the full story, the letter concluded. They contain the original recording and my own audio logs, my testimony of everything that happened. What you do with them is your final choice. You can destroy them and live in peace. You can use them to demand more money from Thorne's company. Or you can do what I never had the courage to do. You can release them. It will not make you rich. It will not make you famous. It will only make you a target. But it will be the truth. The burden of this knowledge is the last and heaviest part of your inheritance. Whatever you choose, know that I am proud of the man I know you have become. Your loving grandfather, Arthur. I put the letter down, my hand trembling. The weight of his words, the weight of the choice, settled on me. I looked at the slowly spinning reels on the tape machine. I flipped a switch on the console, and out of a speaker, crackling with the dust of decades, a voice emerged. It was a young man's voice, confident, clear, my grandfather. Audio log, October 17th, 1988, he said. The following is a copy of the intercepted transmission and my sworn testimony regarding its contents. I leaned forward, and in the quiet hum of the lonely radio station, I began to listen to the truth. The pressure mounted quickly. A week after the first letter, a second one arrived from Pioneer Valley Development. The tone was less friendly. It mentioned their significant investments in the area and the community's desire for progress. It made a new offer, $75,000, but it also hinted at legal action, referencing zoning laws and eminent domain for regional improvement projects. It was the classic carrot and stick, but the stick was getting bigger. I ignored it. I spent my days working on the station, but my nights were spent in the operations room listening to the tapes. I listened to the original recording of General Thorne's treason, his voice calm and arrogant as he sold out his country. I listened to my grandfather's logs, documenting the threats, the isolation, the heartbreak of leaving his family. I heard the story of his life here, the quiet dignity of his long wait. His voice, steady and resolute, became a constant presence. I felt like I knew him. The third letter came via certified mail. It was from a law firm representing Pioneer Valley. This one was all stick. It was a formal notice of intent to file a lawsuit to seize the property under an obscure local ordinance about blighted and non-productive land. It claimed my station was an environmental hazard and a detriment to the community. They were going to paint me as a squatter in a toxic waste dump and use the courts to force me out. The anger I felt was cold and clean. They weren't just trying to take my land. They were trying to erase my grandfather, to twist his sanctuary into a blight, to finish the job they started 30 years ago. They thought I was just some kid who would be scared off by a lawyer's letterhead. They didn't know I was raised by the system. I knew a thing or two about bullies in suits. I knew I couldn't fight them alone. My mind went back to the one person who had ever navigated the system on my behalf, Ms. Albright. I wasn't sure if she could help, but she was the only official contact I had. I drove into Lone Pine and used the payphone outside the general store. I called the main number for the social services office and asked for her. I was put on hold for what felt like an eternity, listening to tinny music that reminded me of the waiting room. Finally, her voice came on the line, tired as ever. "This is Albright." "Ms. Albright, it's Leo Vance." There was a pause. "Leo? My God, where are you? Are you all right?" There was a genuine warmth in her voice that surprised me. "I'm okay. I'm at the property my grandfather left me, in Inyo County." "You actually went," she said, a note of awe in her voice. "We all wondered. When you never checked into a shelter, we worried. What is it? What's wrong?" I took a deep breath and laid it all out. The letters from my grandfather, the tapes, General Thorne, the development company and their legal threats. I told her everything. I expected her to tell me I was crazy, to take the money and run. Instead, she was silent for a long time. "Leo," she finally said, her voice low and serious. This is far beyond anything I've ever dealt with. This isn't a social services issue. This is something else entirely. You need a specific kind of lawyer, a very specific kind." "I can't afford a lawyer," I said. "Not one that can go up against a company like this." "Maybe you can't," she said, and I could hear the sound of her typing on a keyboard. "But there are people who do this work, pro bono, journalists, legal aid societies that specialize in whistleblower cases, in protecting evidence. Let me make some calls. Don't do anything. Don't respond to them. Just sit tight. And Leo, be careful." 2 days later, I got a call on the payphone. Sal, the taxi driver, had driven out to the station to tell me I had an urgent call waiting for me at the diner. It was a woman named Elena Ramirez, a journalist. Ms. Albright had come through. I spoke to Elena for an hour. I told her the story again. She asked sharp, intelligent questions. She wasn't interested in the family drama. She was interested in the evidence. She asked me to read her excerpts from my grandfather's logs, to describe the recording. At the end of the call, she said, "Don't let those tapes out of your sight. I'm getting on a plane. I'll be in Lone Pine in 2 days. We're going to need to verify them, but if they are what you say they are, this is a major story." This was it, the final choice, the point of no return. I could meet with her and hand over the tapes, setting in motion a chain of events I couldn't control. It would mean putting my grandfather's legacy and my own safety in the hands of strangers. Or I could call her back, tell her I'd made a mistake, and destroy the tapes forever. I could take the money and disappear. Live a quiet, comfortable, haunted life. I walked out of the diner into the bright desert sun and looked west, toward the hills where my station was, my home. It wasn't just a bunker anymore. It was a testament. My grandfather had spent 20 years waiting for the right time. He had died waiting. He hadn't given me this inheritance so I could finish his hiding. He had given it to me so I could finish his fight. I knew what I had to do. 2 days later, I met Elena in the back booth of the diner. She was younger than I expected, with sharp, focused eyes that missed nothing. With her was a man, a forensic audio expert. I handed them the tapes. They spent the rest of the day in a motel room, with equipment they had brought, authenticating them. That evening, Elena called me. Her voice was electric. "They're real, Leo. They're authentic. We have him. We have the whole story." The story broke a week later. It wasn't a headline on the national news. It was a long-form investigative piece published online. It was quiet, but it was devastating. It laid out the whole sordid history of General Thorne and his shadow network, backed by the undeniable evidence of his own voice and my grandfather's meticulous logs. The Pioneer Valley Development Group immediately issued a statement denying everything, calling it a smear campaign based on fabricated evidence from a disgruntled former employee. But the damage was done. Other news outlets picked up the story. A congressional committee announced an inquiry. The company's stock plummeted. Their lawyers stopped sending me letters. They had bigger problems now. The aftermath was not dramatic. There were no movie-style confrontations. Thorne, now in his late 90s and in poor health, was never criminally charged. But his legacy was destroyed. His company was eventually dismantled, sold off in pieces. The threat was gone. I had won. Or rather, my grandfather had. I had just been the one to carry the message. I never saw a dime from the story. I never wanted one. My reward was the quiet that settled over the valley. My reward was my home. Life at K7 became my new normal. I used the money from the ammo box not to get rich, but to live. I bought a better truck. I installed a small solar panel array on the roof to supplement the generator. I built a small greenhouse so I could grow my own food. I fixed the leaky roof. I painted the interior. I turned the cold, sterile bunker into a place of warmth and life. The main operations room, with its silent, hulking machines, became my study. I read my grandfather's books. I learned about electronics, about history, about the stars you could see so clearly from the roof at night. The place that had been his prison became my university. I reconnected with the world, but on my own terms. I got a satellite internet connection. I finished my high school diploma online. I started taking college courses. I kept in touch with Ms. Albright, who was a quiet, constant source of encouragement. I even started my own small business, repairing electronics for people in town, using the skills I'd learned from my grandfather's manuals. George from the hardware store sent me customers. Maria from the diner had me fix her coffee machine. I was no longer the strange kid on the hill. I was Leo, the guy who could fix things. I had found my place. I had built a community. Sometimes, late at night, when the wind howls around the radio tower, I sit in the operations room and think about the strange path that brought me here. I think about that scared, angry kid in Ms. Albright's office. He felt so alone, so abandoned. He didn't know that the story of his life wasn't about what was taken from him, but about what was being held in trust for him. He didn't know that abandonment could be a form of protection, that isolation could be a kind of love. My grandfather gave me a choice, and in the end, that's what we all have. We can't choose where we come from, the circumstances we're born into, or the wounds we carry. But we can choose what we build on that broken ground. We can choose who we become. This station, K7, didn't just become my home. It became the place where I learned to stand. It's a lonely place, but it's not empty. It's full of memory, sacrifice, and a quiet, stubborn hope. It's full of love. If my story has meant something to you, if it has touched on some part of your own journey of finding your ground, I hope you'll subscribe and become a part of this community. Share your own story of finding or building a home in the comments below. I read them all because I believe every story of survival and resilience deserves to be heard. We all deserve a place to call home, even if we have to build it ourselves out in the middle of nowhere.